Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible. I'll just start. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome here in Teylers Museum. A virtual welcome. It's a bit strange with these events because I'm looking at an empty room with empty chairs, but my heart is filled with joy because I know that we're together now with more than 150 lovers of master drawings gathered from all over the world, I might say, to look at, talk about, and think about the beautiful art of drawing. The occasion for this virtual gathering is the publication of the new collection catalogue of Italian drawings of 17th and 18th centuries in Teylers Museum, thoroughly researched and very eloquently written about by Karel van Tuyl van Seroskerken, published in two beautiful volumes. They're here at the desk in a beautiful edition by Primavera Pers. This is the fifth part in an ongoing series of printed catalogues of the drawings collection of Teylers Museum. And this one covers over 900 drawings by artists such as Bernini, Guarcino, Salvator Rosa, Carracci, and many others, almost all of them part of the famous acquisition in the very early days of the museum, 1790 of 1700 drawings from the collection of Livio Odescalchi. I'm sure Karel will tell us more about that. During the long process of studying this collection, Karel van Tuyl has found a wealth of new knowledge. He has confirmed and changed attributions, found new information on provenance, sharpened our understanding of the meaning of works, and consolidated ideas and notions about Italian art history. And with all this new information shows is the great value of undertaking such a lengthy and often difficult research project. It makes us all understand better what these drawings actually are, how and why they were made, what their meaning is. And through this, we gain a better understanding of the paintings, sculptures, and architecture they usually resulted in, the world around those works, and most of all, the people involved with them. Because through this, ultimately, and most importantly, in my opinion, it teaches us more about ourselves, our own dreams, beliefs, visions, and ideas reflected in these drawings. It's often said that the art of drawing is special because it is the most intimate art form. Looking at a drawing brings us closer to the maker than with any other medium. It makes us part of the creative process, witnessing the artist while they're at work, as if we're looking over their shoulder while present in the studio. And today we have the privilege of looking over the shoulders of several distinguished art historians studying artists at work. The program will start with a presentation by Karel van Tuyl on his research. I don't think he needs a lot of introduction or wants it, but I will do it anyway, and I'll keep it short.
Good idea.
Karel van Tuyl worked for 20 years in Teylers Museum as the curator and head of collections before being appointed head of the Department of Prints and Drawings in the Louvre in Paris until his retirement in 2013. He then returned to Haarlem as honorary curator to resume work on the catalogue, which is the focus of today's symposium. Over the years, Karel van Tuyl has worked on numerous books and exhibitions on artists such as Michelangelo, Guarcino, Claude Lorrain, or Annibale Carracci, to name a few. In the year 2000, his earlier collection catalogue of 15th and 16th century Italian drawings in Teylers Museum was published, describing, among others, the works by Michelangelo and Raphael and other Renaissance masters in the museum's collection. After Karel van Tuyll's presentation, three distinguished international colleagues will respond to his research, being Simonetta Prosperi Valenti, Sebastian Schütze, and Cristiana Romali. And they will be introduced by Klazina Botke, who as Getty Paper Project Fellow now works on the Italian drawings in the Boijmans Museum in Rotterdam. Klazina Botke will also moderate the rest of this afternoon. So it is in these good hands that I now leave you to go sit in that empty room, and I wish us all a very inspiring afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to start the PowerPoint presentation.
That is. Welcome, and thank you for joining this online symposium about the 17th century drawing catalogue, Italian drawings catalogue here in Haarlem. As you well know, all collections are different. Each one is special. Whether we're talking about a collection of postage stamps, Luristan bronzes of old-timers or old master drawings, each has its own character and its own feel. Depending on its origins, on the taste and preferences of the collector, and his or her financial possibilities, on the vagaries of the market, and in some cases also depending on the role of subsequent curators when we're talking about museum collections. All these and many more factors have their impact on the character of a given collection. The unique character of the collection of Italian drawings here in Haarlem, one half of which is described in the catalogue presented today, has often been extolled, if not always for the right reasons. One of the benefits of now having a full catalogue of all drawings, and what is more in book form, is that it allows one to assess that special character, as it were, at a glance, by leafing through these two tomes. In conjunction with that, devoted to the 16th century drawings published 21 years ago, I'm ashamed to say. We have much reason to be grateful to the Taylor Museum's commitment to publish the catalogue in book form instead of online. As Marianne Scharlo rightly points out in the director's preface, a printed catalogue brings out the coherence of the works. No website could allow one to grasp as quickly the extent to which Roman Bolognese show dominates the collection, or to appreciate the huge percentage of landscape drawings it contains. The Taylor collection has always been known for its large runs of drawings by certain 17th century artists, Guarcino, Grimaldi, Testa, and so forth. Yet only now will the outsider be struck as forcefully also by the fact that other schools and artists are entirely absent. No Venetian drawings to speak of, very few Tuscan, nothing by Sacchi or Leoni or Gemignani, to mention just a few names. No attempt was made here, quite obviously, to build a universal collection. It's a highly selective group of works. Whether that selection was dependent on individual taste or market availability is, for the moment, anyone's guess. One of the points that will come up during today's talks is, I'm sure, the provenance of the collection that Terry already evoked just now. It is by now established that it was formed in a very limited time span between 1651 and 1713, and mainly by two people, Queen Christina of Sweden and Don Livio Odescalchi. Christina brought 7 albums full of wonderful 16th century drawings to Rome when she moved there in 1656 and added to them afterwards. Then, after the Queen's death, Don Livio acquired the artworks she had assembled and added many, many more to them. And then in December 1790, a century later, the Taylor Foundation bought some 1,700 old master drawings from the heirs of Odescalchi. The fact that there are no 18th century drawings in the Odescalchi collection is brought out particularly starkly now. Of all the 18th century sheets in the catalogue, a grand total of 5, they all entered the collection post 1790. We do have a full inventory of the Odescalchi collection at Don Livio's death, in which many drawings now in Haarlem can be traced. We have inventories of a few of the Queen's books of drawings. Should show you their portraits. A few of the inventories of the books of drawings owned by the Queen, but regrettably we have no solid information concerning any 17th century sheets she may have owned. The introduction lays out what is known and what can be inferred about the growth of the Seicento collection now in Haarlem. My personal interpretation of the evidence is that the Queen's role was limited where modern art was concerned, but there is room for disagreement on this point. Unfortunately, the current pandemic made it impossible to continue the search in the Roman archives for Don Livio's missing account books, the retrieval of which should one day clinch the matter. This is all familiar stuff, and my apologies for rehashing it yet again. The important thing to remember is that the Seicento drawings discussed in this catalogue were assembled between 1651 and 1713 in Rome and can therefore be analyzed as a whole, as a coherent group in the context of the Roman art market of the late 17th century. They were acquired pretty much as modern or even contemporary art, regardless of whether we believe it's Queen Christina or Don Livio who instigated their acquisition. Excluding the numerous landscapes, the majority of the sheets are composition drawings and finished figure studies of the type most sought after by Seicento collectors. Writing in September 1688 to an agent who was on the lookout for drawings for his collection, Don Livio noted that, quote, if there are any studies or sketches by painters and fully finished, del tutto terminate, those would be appreciated, particularly if the price were attractive. The phrase he uses is a prezzo pittoresco. As a whole, the Seicento collection reflects a common pattern in 17th century elite collecting. Monarchs and patricians like Christina or Livio did not acquire their drawings piecemeal, but bought them en bloc, acquiring albums or groups of drawings identified and assembled for the purpose by agents and dealers who proposed them to their patrons for acquisition. Many groups of drawings in the Taylor Museum manifestly come from such libri di disegni. Some, as I hope you can see in this slide, still bear at the top left, for instance, page numbers from the old album in which they were at one point pasted and which has now since been dismantled. These, the ones on the screen, must have been placed in an album with cartoonesque drawings. The Guercino material appears in Don Livio's inventory in the form of an album. So do the drawings by Salvator Rosa, Claude, and there's every reason to believe that the same held for the works by Pietro Testa and Domenichino. Just a few of Livio's albums survived intact, and the Taccuino with sketches by Cortona and Ferri that was acquired not long ago by the Istituto Centrale per la Grafica in Rome is the most significant example. These albums do, of course, raise an interesting question. To what extent can we speak of the personal taste of someone like Christina of Sweden, where master drawings are concerned, when the sheets that she bought had been selected and placed in albums by someone else, well before they came to her collection? This point may come up later in the discussion. For now, I have been asked to talk about my experiences during the preparation of this catalogue. All of them positive, let me assure you. As everyone who has compiled the collection catalogue will confirm, the question that is most often asked of the cataloguer is whether there are any new discoveries to report. It's also one of the most difficult to answer, for in a way, each drawing, every entry is itself the fruit of a discovery, an experience. Discoveries come in all shapes and sizes, and the ones that make headlines, Bernini drawings discovered in Haarlem, are rarely the most intrinsically significant, however gratifying and fun the brief flurry of attention may have been. For after all, can one call it a discovery? No, sorry. A discovery when the artist's name is inscribed on the sheet, as it is here, for all to see. What I'd like to do is discuss a number of experiences and discoveries during the preparation of this catalogue that illustrate how defining what constitutes a discovery isn't always a straightforward matter. Finding a previously unidentified masterpiece is, of course, a thrilling experience, but alas, I cannot claim such a feat. Do reattributions qualify as discoveries? And is it a discovery when the purpose of a drawing is recognized? For the cataloguer, the thrill can be just as keen. Among the fine group of head studies by Domenichino in the museum is a sheet with a male head looking upwards, done in black and white chalk on blue-gray paper. It had been identified in the 1960s by Van Recht van Altena, former keeper, as a study for one of Domenichino's earliest independent paintings, a stoning of St. Stephen at Chantilly, a work of about 1606. And in his 1982 monograph, Richard Spear confirmed that identification. And indeed, in the small Chantilly painting, there is a not dissimilar head, that of a man crouching in the lower right corner and picking up a stone. But the match is not 100%. And upon re-examining the Domenichino material, it became clear that the Taylor study isn't an early work at all, but must be a product of Domenichino's very last years, since it was manifestly made on purpose for the martyrdom of Saint Januarius in the cathedral at Naples, painted in 1639-40. The head is that of the executioner in the middle of the painting, who grabs one of the saint's companions by the beard and drags him towards the throne. Does this count as a discovery? Finding the correct place for a drawing in Domenichino's oeuvre signifies a small chronological adjustment at the end of his career rather than at the beginning. Yet discovery, such as it is, doesn't materially affect our understanding of Domenichino's trajectory, even if it is a sobering thought that a figure study from the very last years of his life could have been considered the fruit of his youth. Or, to put it more positively, it nicely confirms the consistently high level of the artist's draftsmanship. Many discoveries that most please the cataloger are not likely to register anywhere on any scale of Richter. No material for press releases, alas, but they're not without interest sometimes. This one made me very happy. Among the drawings traditionally given to Salvator Rosa is a small roundel in pen and wash, just over 11 centimeters in diameter, with an image of Jacob's dream. That it wasn't by Rosa was clear to all, but such was the prestige of a Nodescalchi provenance for drawings by Rosa, an artist who is a particular favorite of Don Livio's, that the sheet was allowed to remain at the margins of Rosa's oeuvre as a possible or potential or maybe not quite original. It long annoyed me that we couldn't find a more positive attribution for this fine sheet. Imagine my delight, therefore, when serendipitously it became clear that the composition is that of a fresco that the Olivetan monk Fra Paolo Novelli painted between 1617 and 20 in the refectory of Monte Oliveto Maggiore. That was first published by Tom Henry. The upright composition, as you can see, has been reduced by later trimming, thereby eliminating the figure of God the Father at the top. But as in the fresco, the angels on the steps seem phantom figures. They are less numerous and their positions are somewhat different in the drawing. The figure of Jacob corresponds quite closely, but the outline of the rock against which he rests differs, as does the shape of the cloud or whatever it is, the rock at his feet. The drawing shows vegetation in the foreground that cannot now be seen in the painting. Such differences suggest that the drawing may well be preparatory to the fresco rather than a good quality copy. As far as I can tell, that would make it the one and only drawing by the painter thus far known. Yet, in the absence of other drawings associated with Novelli, who is anyway a fairly shadowy artist, this cannot be determined with any certainty. Still, it gave me some satisfaction to be able to label the drawing Fra Paolo Novelli or after him, rather than perhaps Circle of Salvator Rosa, ? And it potentially opens up the field for further identifications. The same holds for this group of 4 figure scenes in black chalk and gray-green paper that evidently belong together, although thematically they're all over the place. An Old Testament scene, Pharaoh's daughter finding the infant Moses, 2 scenes of miraculous acts of a monk, and the mythological encounter of Pan and Syrinx. Their old attribution was to Pietro da Cortona. Altena had suggested Filippo Lauri, a not unreasonable proposal, but one that lacked corroboration. The clue here lay in the monastic scenes. It turns out that they represent miracles of Saint Benedict, and that both were used in 1661 by the painter Giovanni Ghisolfi when he did a chapel, he decorated a chapel dedicated to the saint in the Certosa at Pavia. Thanks to Bert Meyer's previous identification of a number of other mythological drawings in Ireland as Ghisolfi's preparatory studies for friezes painted in Vicenza, the museum now owns the grand total of a dozen drawings by Ghisolfi, the largest group of drawings by him thus far identified. Indeed, the Netherlands can boast yet another study by the artist. Recognition of the Taylor drawings led to the identification of this sheet in the Kröller-Müller Museum in Otterlo as their companion. Since the artist used to be all but unknown as a draftsman, the establishment of a corpus, small as it is, should allow other sheets to be recognized in the future. And that Ghisolfi is so well represented in Haarlem is surely due to his Lombard origin. Milanese born, he worked for some time in Rome, where he was close to Salvator Rosa. His name appears in Don Livio's correspondence, and several paintings by Ghisolfi's hand were in Livio's collection. One of the benefits of working on a catalogue for such a very long time as I did is that it allows one's ideas, good and bad and preconceived, to evolve, and one hopes to improve. A case in point. I'm sorry, did I not show that one? Oh, well. Yeah. A case in point, the museum owns 7 pen drawings with animal skeletons that hadn't been published or commented on previously. Here you see 4 of them. Van Rechter Altena in the 60s recognized a link between some of these sheets and prints that were made in Holland in the 1620s by Hendrik Hondius after his Italian contemporary Filippo di Liagno, best known as Filippo Napoletano. In 1620-21, that artist had published a small number of etchings with human and animal skeletons that he dedicated to his German friend Johann Faber, a papal doctor in Rome. The etchings circulated among members of the Accademia dei Lincei, of which Faber was a member. A few copies were printed and the series is rare. Altena asked a friendly zoologist to have a look at the drawings. The verdict was that from an anatomical viewpoint, the skeletons are wildly inaccurate. Too many vertebrae, displaced ribs, extended spines, etc., etc. Perhaps discouraged by this assessment, Van Rechter Altena did not pursue the matter. He evidently didn't show the skeleton drawings to the art historian Marco Chiarini, who otherwise knew the collection here at Haarlem well, and who later published the definitive monograph on Filippo Napoletano. When I initially began working on the drawings, the fact that Chiarini nowhere mentions the Haarlem group led me to believe that he considered our drawings to be copies, a verdict that I accepted and endorsed in our registration of the sheets. Yet, on returning to study them many years later, more careful observation gave pause. Can these sheets really be considered copies after the etchings? Or might they perhaps be preparatory to them? Most are in the opposite direction to the print. And when you look closely, you find simply too many differences from the prints, too many pentimenti and abandoned sketches to make it credible that they are copies. This close-up of the camel's head and body may help convince you. There are preliminary sketches in black chalk along the neck, a head turned in the other direction, the upper right. And there are also pentimenti in the penwork. In the etching, the skeleton of what is said to be a rabbit on the left, but which is actually perhaps a baboon, the animal incongruously holds bunches of flowers in its paws. These are not foreseen in the drawing. What is more, the quality of the drawing speaks for their authenticity, and they compare well with other identified drawings by Napoletano. Still, if our sheets are by him, as I'm convinced they must be, they present us with an entirely different problem for which I haven't attempted to find an answer. Why are they so inaccurate in anatomical terms? The Accademia dei Lincei, of which Johann Faber was a member, insisted on lynx-eyed observation, as their name, Lincei, implies. Careful scrutiny of the facts of nature was their motto. Faber himself conducted countless dissections at Hospital Santo Spirito in Sassia, to which he was attached. Yet these skeletons, which purportedly represent skeletons in Faber's own collection, and which he praised in a letter to Galileo as being done with a most erudite hand, are anything but true to nature. They're bizarrely unnatural. The bird in the central image on the screen is described in the print as a heron, yet looks nothing like one. Where's the beak? The camel's spine shows odd spurs or protruding bones that somehow suggest a hump on its back in the drawing, but these are non-existent in a true camel skeleton. The rabbit, so-called, picks flowers. How to account for such inaccuracies in a supposedly scientific series of images? Unfortunately, in his wonderful, engrossing book on the Accademia dei Lincei, David Freeberg does not address this particular question, and for the moment, no answer can be formulated. To me, the most intimidating section, if I may confess, of the catalogue was undoubtedly the landscapes. As I worked away on the other entries, the 340 plus landscape drawings are always there, a dark mass in the background, demanding to be tackled at some point, a point as deferred as long as possible. Italian landscape drawings of the 17th century in pen and ink are a notorious minefield when it comes to attributions. And the group in Haarlem had rarely been looked at before, let alone discussed in print, so I was on my own. Livio Odescalchi's inventory of 1713, which lists many hundreds, perhaps thousands of landscape drawings in different albums and folders, did not help. Its compilers simply attributed most of them to Giovanni Francesco Grimaldi, the acknowledged specialist in the genre in 17th century Rome. Grimaldi, Bolognese by birth, settled in Rome in the late 1620s and became very successful at painting the interiors of numerous saloni and gallerie in palazzi with attractive Baroque frescoes, often including landscapes in the classical vein. This drawing shows you a project for what may have become one of those frescoes. In the early 1970s, Marco Chiarini, whose name I mentioned earlier, examined the Haarlem group of landscapes while preparing his Disegni Italiani di Paesaggio, published in 1972, still the only book on the subject. And he very usefully separated them into two groups, those accepted as by Grimaldi and the Circle, and the more numerous others that he recognized as being by Crescenzio Onofri, a Roman pupil of Gaspard Duguay. In the 1980s, Isabella Lodi-Fé was planning a thorough study of Grimaldi's draftsmanship and visited the museum, but regrettably, her research has not resulted in a publication or a full publication, and not all her insights have been recorded. Here you see a representative selection of the almost 100 drawings in the collection that I have come to believe to be by Grimaldi himself. Sorting out which might be by the master, which were studio variants, later copies, was no simple task. Major groups by the artists in the British Museum, in the Nationalmuseum in Stockholm and in the Louvre have been catalogued in recent years. But it must be said that none of these catalogues, however useful, cast a very critical eye on the material. Nor did the authors of the two recent monographs on Grimaldi. They discuss a number of drawings, but mainly in the context of the artist's frescoes and his etchings. In fact, no one but Isabella Lodi-Fé appears to have looked at all seriously or critically at the huge number of Grimaldesque drawings in collections and auctions and sales all over the world. And generally, the tone in which the artist is discussed is dismissive. The communis opinio is that Grimaldi was a boring, repetitive, and unimaginative landscape craftsman. All the more reason I wasn't looking forward to having to write entries for the dozens of sheets given to him in the collection. And then when I started doing it, I discovered an artist whose oeuvre repays close study 100 times, far more interesting, more inspired than he is often thought to be. And one whose oeuvre raises all sorts of interesting issues. The problem is, perhaps, that he was so successful in that his work was imitated left and right, and a sizable number of the so-called Grimaldis in various collections worldwide are not by him at all, but by, well, that is the question, by who? Who might have been responsible for the hundreds of surviving copies and variants and derivations of Grimaldesque compositions that are manifestly not by him? One example. Here you see a river landscape with buildings, stone bridge, and a steep hill, executed pen and ink with some wash over a black chalk sketch. It is not Grimaldi's masterpiece at all, far from it. A little rough, hastily done, perhaps sketched out of doors or begun out of doors, although this is always difficult to determine. It's certainly not the kind of carefully composed and beautifully finished classical landscape for which the artist is best appreciated. And yet, of this unremarkable drawing, there are at least 4 drawn copies. One also in Haarlem, another in the Fitzwilliam Museum at Cambridge, one formerly in the Steiner collection in New York, and a variant copy at the Istituto Centrale in Rome. That the Haarlem version shown in the main image is the prime original cannot be doubted, for the bit of rock in the river with a branch that sticks out from it was added here as an afterthought on top of earlier pen lines that you can easily make out that indicate the river's surface, while the other versions all include the rock and the branch from the beginning. Why was an undistinguished landscape sketch by a not particularly famous artist copied numerous times? And this is not an isolated case, as anyone willing to go through the material can confirm. Dozens of Grimaldesque landscapes exist in multiple versions. Many of those versions are still considered the originals. Large groups of drawings in collections such as Warsaw and Copenhagen all consist of almost nothing but copies after originals by Grimaldi identified elsewhere. Are these studio copies? What was their purpose? There must have been any number of assistants to help Grimaldi execute his frescoes, but no names are recorded other than his son Alessandro, and very little information is available on the matter. Of course, figure drawings by the great masters, Dürer, Raphael, Michelangelo, and so forth, were copied frequently by students of later generations. But in general, landscapes, other than those by Titian and the Carracci, are not the kind of drawing that gets copied. Then why should there be such a massive number of copies after Grimaldi's landscapes? One possible answer is suggested by the correspondence between the young Livio Odescalchi, freshly arrived in Rome in 1674, and the nobleman Francesco Maria della Porta, a member of the Odescalchi household who remained behind in Como and kept up a steady correspondence with his young protege in Rome. Now, della Porta turns out to have been an enthusiastic amateur draftsman, particularly keen on landscapes, and his letters repeatedly urge Livio to send examples from Rome for della Porta to imitate. Salvator Rosa is a particular favorite, and so is Onofri. Livio obliged by sending etchings and perhaps also drawings. The first known inventory of Livio's collection, compiled in 1691, lists several framed landscape drawings by della Porta on the walls of Livio's private quarters. Now, the phenomenon of amateur draftsmen in Seicento, Italy, has, to my knowledge, barely been studied. But the large number of copies after Grimaldi's landscapes makes me wonder if perhaps young gentlemen in Rome or elsewhere were instructed in the art of drawing by copying landscapes. The same way well-brought-up young ladies in the 19th century endlessly copied flower pieces and early lithographs to perfect their skill. Should we perhaps view the popularity of Grimaldi's landscapes as a source for copies in such a context? It's a completely open question because I have no idea of the answer, and other answers are, of course, possible. So there you have a number of experiments and discoveries made while preparing this catalogue. None of them are particularly earth-shattering. None will change the course of art history, but each one does pose fresh questions that will need to be tackled. How does reassigning a particular drawing to a different phase in an artist's career influence our view of his evolution, as in the case of Domenichino? Will assembling a first modest corpus of Ghisolfi drawings lead to further discoveries and identifications? Why do Filippo Napolitano's studies of animal skeletons display such a cavalier disregard for anatomical correctness? And why on earth does Giovanni Francesco Grimaldi appear to be the most copied landscape draftsman in history? Obviously, a catalogue is not the place to pursue these matters. Its more limited role is to provide information as accurate as possible on the works catalogued, to assemble the relevant bibliography, and to offer, where possible, an art historical evaluation of the work based on facts or well-reasoned hypotheses. Catalogue entries are intended to provide building blocks for future, more fundamental research. If this catalogue of the 17th century Italian drawings in the Thaler collection achieves that goal, I shall be well satisfied. Thank you.
Thank you, Karel. This wonderful presentation and an insight in your process and some of the examples. And it shows how important it is to catalog, and that all these new starting points for new research are coming out of this project. So that I think is very important, and you showed really clearly in your presentation. And especially with the landscape drawings, there should be more attention to those.
Absolutely.
Yes, so that's a good point for new art historians to, or people are already busy with that, just to look at them again and yeah, it's opening new questions on these drawings. Very important. Thank you. So we'll have now 3 responses to the catalogue and to Karel's work by 3 experts in the field of drawings. And afterwards, Karel will also have the opportunity to respond to them again, of course. And there can also be questions by the public. So if anyone has a question, you can post them in the Q&A or in the chat. And we will be, try to read them out and ask them to Karel or one of the other speakers. So we have 3 speakers, other speakers today, respondents, and we'll start with the first to give the response. That is Simonetta Prosperi Valenti. She's a professor emeritus at Tor Vergata University in Rome and a prominent expert in the field of Italian drawings from the 16th to the 18th century. And her research focused mainly on the history of collecting and the drawing art market, on which she has also published extensively. These include volumes like the Il Codice Resta di Palermo of 2007 and I Disegno del Codice Caponiano from the Biblioteca Vaticana, Apostolica Vaticana in 2010. She also organized a conference on Carlo Maratti, which are many drawings in the catalogue as well. And she's currently a member of the Padre Resta project, dedicated to studying this famous Italian collector of the late 17th century. She will now share some of her ideas about the catalogue, and we'll discuss some drawings in more detail. So, Professoressa, I will give you the word, and I will share your PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Okay, good afternoon. I am the first to speak in this presentation, and so I want to greet all the friends connected online, and starting with Karel van Tuyl and all the others that follow from far away. I am very glad and honored to have been invited to present the beautiful catalogue of my friend Karel van Tuyl, Italian drawings on the 17th and 18th century in Thaler's Museum Arnhem. With more than 900 drawings that follows the one dedicated to the 15th and the 16th century by the same author. And I won't say this author, Karel van Tuyl, was one of the best connoisseurs of the Italian drawings in the world. First of all, I would like to compliment him for the editorial achievement of these 2 volumes, completely illustrated in colors. This is very important for the catalogue of drawings, maybe even more than for paintings catalogue, as the images in high resolution make possible the analysis of the smallest details of the drawings. Almost, yes, like a facsimile. Secondly, I wish to underline the scientific importance of this work, because I repeat, it is entirely illustrated catalog of all the drawings in the museum. The most significant ones, yet published and exhibited in a lot of exhibitions in Amsterdam, in Rome, in Florence, and we have seen a lot of these beautiful drawings. But there are illustrated the less important ones, those of minor draw masters. I would like to underline that the publication of all museal funds for this case, in this case, drawings, because the catalog is the basic instrument for promoting the material, for supporting this progress of the studies, and for discussing the attribution of the drawings. Maybe we do not agree with some of the attribution. Never mind. This is, I think, is not important. The important thing is to have a complete catalog, published with all the drawings illustrated. Nowadays, we use, of course, the catalogs online of the database of the museums. The most en vogue because it is easiest to consult, of course. No? However, they cannot replace a printed catalog of collection. And I invited the scholars and the historian of art to write printed catalog, to publish printed catalog. But which are the most significant drawings in this collection? Can you show the next group? Thank you. The most consistent group of the collection is chiefly Roman, or better, the drawings of artists working in Rome. I am adopting the definition set up by Panseguier for the drawings of artists coming from all the parts of Italy, active in Rome at the end of 16th century, the British Museum. It was the title of a very important catalog for all the scholars of drawings. We find in this catalog the numerous of Bolognese artists that lived and worked in Rome: Domenichino, Lanfranco, Reni, and the next, please, and Grimaldi. We have seen the drawings, other drawings in Grimaldi, a lot of drawings by Grimaldi, Onofri and Claude Lorrain. For Claude, was landscape will be catalogued elsewhere. And then the Roman, Pietro da Cortona, please, the next, for this wonderful study for the frescoes in Palazzo Mattei. Is a young work by Pietro da Cortona, these very strong drawings. And the next, please, for the Chiesa Nuova. This is a study for the figure of San Filippo Neri in the fresco in the apside in Santa Maria in Vallicella in Rome. A late work by Pietro da Cortona. And the next is, yes, all the Cortonesco. You can see this Putto Barocco. And the next is Romanelli. Yes, it's this very famous drawings with the blue wash and heightened with white. It's very, very strong of wood color. And the next is, I believe, oh yes, Pier Francesco Mola with so-called caricature. There's an important group of drawings by Pier Francesco Mola, this wonderful draw master in Italian, Roman, but Italian 600. And Pietro Testa, but the next I think is Canini, Giovanni Angicalini. This is not so famous, but the drawings, there are 3 drawings, I think, for the frontispiece of a new edition by the Vita dei Pittori Scultori by Giorgio Vasari, printed in Bologna in the half of the century. This is the one of the 3 drawings, I think, for this frontispiece. And then The next is Carlo Maratti, is so-called Raphael of this century by Pietro Bellori. Carlo Maratti with the studies for engravings and for the painting, the frescoes in San Marco. And this one is for a painting now for the church in Sant'Angelo Magno in Ascoli Piceno. Even the provenance of the drawings of the tilers comes from Rome. It was Van Rangert and Altena, the first investigate first that the drawings in Tiler Museum had the provenance from the Queen Christina of Sweden collection. We can see the next, please. We can see this legendary woman, Christina di Svezia. This tradition is based on the historic fact that at the end of 17th century, the Prince Livio Descalchi purchased the collection from the Queen. Paintings, sculpture, a lot of paintings, sculpture, ancient sculpture, it was a very, very important collection. And tapestry, for the drawing, there are some questions we shall see. And that at the end of the next century, or the 18th century, Baron Leveson bought from Livio Descalchi heirs, Livio Erba or Descalchi, 14 albums with a lot of drawings for Tyler Museum in Harlem. This well-known tradition of the provenance, I must say fascinating without any doubt, is questioned by Karel van Tuyl. He raises himself the following question. Did the drawings come to Livio Descalchi? Can we see Livio Descalchi on the next slide? Yes. Did the drawings came to Livio Descalchi along the rest of Christina collection of drawings? Or did Livio acquire some drawings or even all of them independently? Obvious from here comes the fact that the patronage and taste of Queen Christina in Rome in her time must be reconsidered, while on the opposite came out Prince Livio Descalchi as patron, collector and amateur of contemporary art. So did Livio enrich his collection himself by buying and putting together drawings in books? This is the question we can see. This is an open question. It is thought to deny that part of this fund did belong to the Queen, but we don't not have inventory or ancient description to confirm it. So the most credible hypothesis forwarded by Karel van Tuyl is that Christina's nucleus was considerably increased by the purchase made by Don Livio. Don Livio especially, and bless Christina di Svezia in this way. In this past, so Christina's role, then of her Cardinal de Chatolino and his nephew Pompeo Solino, and even that of Livio Descalchi, is a lot of passages are not clear. The role of Christina di Svezia is not very clear. I agree with Karel van Tuyl that one should emphasize the role of the cleric Francesco Antonio Renzi. I cannot show you Antonio Renzi because you have not portrait of this collector and dealer who sold volumes of drawings with identical bind to Cardinal Filippo Antonio Gualtieri in Rome. The volumes then acquired by Cardinal Enrico Orsini and now preserved in Rome, Istituto della Grafica. And Renzi sold also to Ratz Bibliothek in Leipzig. Renzi or some other identified dealer, question mark, must have bound and ascribed the attribution on the libri dei disegni sold to Leipzig and Rome. They are very similar. as Andreas Soderborg and Ursula Fischer-Pace described in the catalog of the drawings, the exhibition of drawings by Salvatore Rosa in Leipzig and in Haarlem some years ago. I admit I am a little disappointed to give up this fascinating tradition about Christina provenance. And can I say, I read between the lines of the introduction that Karel also is a little disappointed. Such a tradition is valid for the drawings of Michelangelo and Goltzius. Of course, we know Christina bought these drawings. We cannot maintain it for the wonderful page of can you see the next image? We cannot maintain this tradition, if not with a question mark, of course, for the wonderful page of Salvatore Rosa and for Cortona and Corteneschi you have seen before, maybe for those drawings of Claude and of numerous landscapes present in Tyler's collection. Maybe these drawings came better from Livio Descalchi than from Christina Ostweden. The figure of Don Livio comes out as passionate collector of contemporary works of art. He was nephew of Innocenzo XI Odescalchi, the enemy of art pope. We know all the problems with Bernini last period with this, and the caricature in Leipzig of this pope by Bernini. Since his young age, Don Livio bought drawings from Renzi and from Father Resta, and also from other dealers such as Antonio Politi and Giuseppe Maria Mitelli. The Tyler's collection mirrors his interest for landscape. His patronage directed to the landscaper Crescenzio Onofri. I don't show you, but there are a lot of drawings in Tyler. Very interesting. I think it's the best and more rich, the richest group of drawings by Crescenzio Onofri in the world. And maybe by Allegrini, Francesco Allegrini, the Claude, and then Livio Descalchi was patron of Gaspar van Wittel, the Dutch painter of views, active in Rome in the end, from the hand of the century, of the 17th century. I think, in fact, if you can put the image, please. I think, in fact, and I conclude here my presentation, that the beautiful and fanciful view of Rome with the Arch of Titus and the Colosseum is a fantastic view, is still anonymous in the catalogue, should be attributed to Gaspar van Wittel. I am quite sure it's by him. And this is my present to Karel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it was a nice ending of the presentation. I think
very. Hadn't occurred to me.
Stop sharing.
Bravo.
Thank you very much, Simonetta. We'll keep the discussion for after the last presentation. So I would like now to introduce the second speaker. That is Professor Sebastian Schütze. He has been a professor of art history at the University of Vienna since 2009 and long associated with the Biblioteca Hertziana in Rome. His interest lies in Italian art of the early modern period and its influence in Rome. His many publications include monographs on Cardinal Maffeo Barberini and the famous artist Caravaggio, and more recent publications are, he is an editor of the conference proceedings of two conferences organized by the Vienna Center of the History of Collecting, published this year. So Professor Schütze, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is sound all right? Very good. So I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon. Carol has been a friend for many years, and we have shared interests, especially in 17th century Italian art. And at the same time, I feel very honored to be included here among the drawing specialists. What I would like to say is just a few words about this really extraordinary publication, which is exceptional in many ways in terms of size, of course, 2 volumes, some 160 pages, beautifully produced and fully illustrated in color. So my compliments not just to Carol for writing it, but also to the Tylers Museum and to the publishing house for such a handsome 2-volume publication. Most importantly, of course, this is a monument of real scholarship, very long, as we have already heard, in gestation. Results have been considered, reconsidered, pondered for many years, and it shows if you read the catalog entries, which demonstrate, of course, decades of intimate knowledge of the Tylers collection and its history, but also shows how much the whole catalog is based on a continuous dialogue between Carol and many friends and colleagues, many great drawing specialists in cabinets around the world. So we finally have this monumental catalog of all the Italian 17th and 18th century drawings in Haarlem. And I think such a catalog is perfectly complementary to the online presence of the collection. I think, and I want to congratulate the Tylers Museum once again for the courage to publish such a 2-volume catalog today, which is, of course, a big effort, also in terms of finding the means to do so. But it seems to me, and that's very important, that the Tylers Museum is not the only institution that sort of looks into this kind of return to traditional catalog publishing in terms of catalog raisonnés of individual artists, but also in terms of such scholarly catalogs of collections. If you think of the many catalogs of the cabinet in Hamburg, for example, that have been published in recent years. Of course, being a scholar of the history of collecting of Bernini, I have also been very interested in Carol's introduction, which Simonetta has already mentioned. So his looking into this intricate history of the drawings acquired in 1790 from the Odescalchi collection in Rome, and especially the question whether most of this bulk of 17th century drawings come from Queen Christina of Sweden, which is the more traditional way of looking at this problem, or if indeed Livio Odescalchi deserves more recognition for at least part of this exceptional group of drawings. Myself, I have been familiar with these questions for many years, and especially in regards with the Bernini drawings in Leipzig, of course, and the beautiful exhibition we have staged there with Jeanette Stoschek in 2014. And I think Carol offers a very detailed account and discusses very critically the historical evidence and the modern scholarships. And at the end, and I think he's to be applauded for this, doesn't happen all too often, that he simply says at the end, I have no conclusive evidence. I have not come across the one and only letter that, documents the fact that it's coming from either Livio or Queen Christina, nor do I have any new archival documentation really to prove the one or the other. But he argues, from my point of view, very convincingly that the Haarlem drawings might indeed have a lot to do with Don Livio's collection rather than with Queen Christina's. And he argues mostly by saying that the drawings we have in Haarlem do fit indeed very nicely into what we know about Don Livio's collecting habits. In the first place, his focus on artists working in Rome, a lot of them contemporary artists from the later part of the 17th century. Also, this incredible presence of landscape drawings we have already mentioned by Grimaldi and Onofri in particular, and also the fact that the collection is especially strong in sketches instead of what princely collectors usually would prefer, and that is highly finished sheets. I will not go into any detailed discussion of attributions proposed. I will, but I will say that what I really like about the catalog is how Carol argues and informs the reader about changing attributions over time, and not just as, has been traditionally given to so-and-so, and now we have come to another conclusion, but very often he sort of describes this changing line of attributions as a very meaningful part of the critical evaluation of the drawings. And I think that that's really very important, because any previous attribution that might got the name wrong is still very meaningful to understand, where our understanding and critical view or evaluation of the drawing is historically coming from. What the new 2-volume catalog certainly does is to make the Haarlem collection of 17th century drawings even better known, and not just known for a few highlights that have been included in many exhibitions, of course, but also the catalog highlights secondary areas, or in the first place areas that seem to be secondary but indeed are very central to the Haarlem collection and to 17th century drawing studies in general. Of course, it was a pleasure to encounter many famous and drawings in the catalog, and many drawings I like personally very much indeed, including Guercino's portrait of Cardinal Bernardino Spada, or Passeri's beautiful Apollo with the lyre, or Mola's St. John the Baptist preaching, or after all, probably one of the finest drawings Schedoni's had of a youth. But as I said before, the catalog also highlights areas which are less known. For example, relatively small, but still pretty consistent and of high quality group of Neapolitan drawings, which I'm personally very much interested in, and not just the well-known examples by Salvatore Rosa, but also some exceptional sheets by Ribera, Spinelli, Pone, for example. And also another aspect I would like to highlight is that through such a catalog, drawings become available also to art historical audiences that might not, in the first place, be interested in connoisseurship or attributions, but that are interested in sort of broader themes and issues that can be posed on the basis of sheets that are, for example, housed in Haarlem. And I would like to point out just two examples. The one is the two famous sheets by Lanfranco for preparatory drawings for his frescoes in the Certosa di San Martino in Naples. And they are extraordinary, of course, as drawings. We all know Lanfranco's draftsmanship, but they're particularly interesting also because the two drawings were obviously so-called contract drawings, so they were part of a notary contract that obliged Lanfranco to execute these inventions rather than other inventions in other drawings he might have shown to his patrons. And it's quite exceptional. We know that these drawings existed. We know that they very often were attached to the notary documents, but very often now we have the notary document in the archive and we have the drawing somewhere else. But in this case, Lanfranco's drawing is actually signed by Lanfranco and his patron, the prior of San Martino, Isidoro de Alegria. And so, for example, such a drawing is an excellent starting point for looking into those more general themes and topics that have to do with the function and use of drawings in 17th century practice. Or just to give a second example, there is a beautiful drawing by Francesco Lauri, an Annunciation, which has a long inscription which gives us the indication that this drawing was approved by the Maestro del Sacro Palazzo, Reginaldo Lucarini, for being transferred into a print, the Incidatur. And this not only gives us a precise date for the drawing, but it also gives us a fairly rare concrete evidence for this approval procedure, which indeed was necessary for all the prints in the Papal State, of course, and especially when it comes to prints that had for example, a specific function within the beatification process of newly created saints. It's very interesting to see how, on the one hand, images couldn't be created before the process came to an end, while at the very same time, such images played already an important role in the process itself. And so having an exact date and having, for example, such a drawing is a very interesting fact indeed. Among all the drawing specialists listening, I will not enter into definite attributions of the drawings Karel has cataloged under anonymous, but just two suggestions. There is a really interesting and I think not much studied group, or not seriously enough studied group, of academic nudes previously attributed to Sacchi and certainly close to Bernini, catalog numbers 838 to 843, which, at least from my point of view, certainly look to me closer to Bernini and Bernini's workshop and workshop practice than they look close to Sacchi, and it would be certainly very interesting to study that group more closely. And then there is one drawing, 834, which is labeled Lombard School, and it's quite particular because it's an oil on paper. And now this might be completely the wrong direction, but my first impression, but by just flipping through the catalog and looking at the drawings, was that in some ways this oil on paper, especially the figure type, looked not too far from Giovanni Baglione, but that's just a suggestion. To finish my few words here, I would just like to underline the quality and diversity of the holdings in Haarlem, and I'm sure the catalog will make the collection even better known, and will introduce not just the 20 most famous drawings in the collection, but the collection as a whole more fully into international scholarship, and insert certain drawings into the critical debate. And as scholarly community, I think we are very, very grateful to Carol in the first place for taking on such an incredible work of cataloging such a large collection. But we are also very grateful to the Tylers Museum for the courage to publish a monumental 2-volume printed catalog these days, and for the publishing house to realize it in the beautiful form we have all seen. So congratulations on the achievement, and I think a really amazing contribution to 17th century drawing scholarship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, and thank you also for your very insightful talk and the importance of sharing research and publishing research, because it helps other researchers immediately, is clear, especially from your example and now again. And I think now twice we have heard how wonderful it is that we have printed catalogs. So I can see the comeback of the printed catalog.
Good.
Okay. I'd like to introduce our last speaker. This is Cristiana Romalli, Senior Specialist Old Master Drawings at Sotheby's in London, where she's worked since 1985. At Sotheby's, she has the responsibility for all Italian drawings worldwide and has organized a large number of major sales, including the Bodmer and Castle Howard Michelangelo's and the Philip Pouncey collection in 2003. And she has contributed to numerous academic publications and as well made some important new discoveries in collaboration with others, including drawings by Leonardo and Raphael. Cristiana would like to give you the floor now, and I will share your PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for having me in the symposium. And I have to congratulate yet again Carol for this extraordinary with this magnificent volume, which are an example not only of scholarship, but I have to say, in reading many of the entries, of intuition about old master drawing. And like Sebastian, I have to say that what is most important when starting looking at these beautiful 2 catalogs is to concentrate on the introduction. And Carol has made it possible for us to go through an enormous amount of information. Although he called them familiar stuff, he made it totally possible for a reader, for instance, like me, which has been always in love with the idea of Queen Christina of Sweden. And maybe one of the first catalog I bought was the 1966 Stockholm exhibition, which I keep as a precious, precious book in my library. But with this 50 pages of really magnificent introduction, which has been actually divided in sections, has made it possible for us to follow this almost 100 years of history, which are extremely important to understand actually the drawing that we'll see then catalogued so wonderfully and with such extensive information. I have to say that each time I thought of something, Carol had already said it, has already gone further, and you know, you feel very totally humbled by this experience, but also is a, for me, that I never seen the original drawing. It's just fantastic because it does put you in the total understanding of what has happened and why this collection is like this, because it's almost an historical factor. I can just going through the various, I was just thinking what Carol said, is Queen Christina of Sweden a real collector of drawings? To my mind, because Queen Christina was a highly political figure of enormous stature, which came obviously, if we say even Sweden was a region, but decided to go and live in Rome, bringing her collection, which was part of the booty of Prague, and this beautiful collection of drawing both, you know, in in 56. I can't remember when he buy the Spearing collection. And was she buying more drawing, and was she adding to this collection? She obviously, the problem with the drawing is that the inventory are only partial. We've seen this all along this history. And drawing were used, you know, when Pompeo Azzolino gives as a donation, he says the drawing were in fact a dono to Livio Descalchi, but then, you know, he also tried to sell the drawing, you know, to Louis XIV. You know, it's all a contradiction. The situation is very ambiguous all the time via the different owner of this drawing. And I was very fascinated, I have to say, to the position of Decio Azzolino. I almost thought that it's worth to be Queen Christina to have Decio Azzolino as your servitore, because he's an extraordinary figure. And who knows if, as Montanari explained, he's got such an important position in the court. He creates the court of Queen Christina of Sweden, and he makes possible that she's a parallel court in the same time of the papal court. We have to imagine that also the Pope must have looked at Queen Christina as a bit of a liability if they didn't keep her under a certain surveillance. So it's absolutely interesting that also her position in Rome and the splendor of her collection, of her importance, of her cultural, and the fact also that she was a woman in that powerful position, only subdued to the Pope, and obviously above all the cardinals and so on, was giving an aura of great importance. So whoever was acquiring something coming from her collection, like will be Livio Descalchi or you know, the Ottoboni, Pietro Ottoboni, when buys the Biblioteca, they were interested in having somebody that was her property, because that's what maybe has also put into a certain shadow the rest of the history of this drawing, because of her aura, which continued up to 1719, when the collection was bought by the board of directors of the Tyler Foundation. So Carol goes on, tells us about every single aspect of the history, of what we find in the drawing, of the various important figures that we encounter. Like, for instance, a very good description of Livio Descalchi, which it's absolutely marvelous. You fall in love with him. I mean, very handsome and very entrepreneurial, very strong personality, you know, at the death of you know, the Pope or Descalchi, he finally can bloom and become what he really was, a great personality, and also a collector, maybe not of great taste, I have to say, but in some ways he reflects what was the taste of collecting of his time. So that's what, at the end, this beautiful group of drawing are the taste of the collector of that period, of people which were not interested, I think, like Leopoldo de' Medici also mentioned by Carol in his introduction, which wanted to do an encyclopedic collection of drawing. These are people which were interested more in the aura that you acquired, being a collector, being a cultivated person, part of an intelligentsia, which was really power at the end. Among the things that Carol explained to us, there is also, and here we have this image that Glassine has given us, you know, this symbol which appears, in fact, in the Harlem drawing, if I'm right, in free drawing by Guercino. And this is this crossed circle, which also we find in some of the Leipzig Bernini drawing and Testa and so on, and in great amount. And that's the first time I noticed this, I call it symbol, because which explains that there is a drawing on the verso. So that's what this cross circle means. But for instance, in the many, almost 400 drawings of Lanfranco, which are in Capodimonte, when I first noticed this, which obviously is well known, they appear to be always in very obtrusive position, mostly in the middle of the right margin. Here, he obviously couldn't put it in the middle of the right margin, but he's put it here in the center. So it's quite offensive. Instead of putting it in a corner where you don't notice, it's always put in a very noticeable place. So I have to agree with Carol when he explains that the Hallam drawing, in fact, for instance, this has been cropped, so it must precede the time when it was put in the Odescalchi album. Whoever it is, I would imagine is a 17th century, maybe somebody also in an artist studio, but must be more than one person which use this symbol. But obviously in Rome, in this milieu, where maybe collector or even artists which had collection could share certain same symbolic feature. Now, you know, going on with a few drawings I can talk about, because obviously it's an enormous, I have to say, the amount covered also in the introduction is so vast that it's very difficult in 10 minutes to give you an idea. But the conclusion that are taken by Carel, I think, are the one we would get to, because you try to resist his question and answers. You know, it sometimes says, well, I don't know how here we can answer because we lack of documentation. But whenever he suggests a possibility, at the end, you will go with this choice. And I think, so it helps us to understand really the group of drawing that this collection owns. And I think it's beautiful because it is attached to the history of this moment. It's a bit like looking at the Quadreria. I always ask myself, why do you enter the Doria Pamphili and you are totally, you know, taken over by millions of Duguay, you know, landscape? You understand that that was, in fact, the taste of the period. That's what collectors and great people of power liked. I wouldn't think it was just collectors, because they were just the taste of the moment in Rome. And that's why, right, so he emphasized that all the drawings in this collection are linked to Rome. The focus is to artists working in Rome. I think was that Sebastian said that, or Simonetta, I don't know. We reuse a very good title, you know, of the Philip Pouncey and Guilherme Pouncey book, because it is true that all artists which were important in Rome. So my second drawing, that here we are, I just wanted to show you, I just took a few drawing I like. This is a beautiful Salvator Rosa. You can see this proto-romantic image that one would imagine with this young musician, and you can just observe the way he touched the chord with the left hand. Is obviously, we know Salvator Rosa from Bandinucci was playing the lute himself, so he knew when he was drawing what exactly was happening. And you have this very romantic, really, young man playing the lute in this garden, and there is an indication on the right-hand side of possibly a classical palace. Very, very handsome drawing. And I thought this must have been the subject of a painting, but in fact, I don't think a painting of this subject exists. And I could only think of another drawing, in fact, in a private collection, and that's the other image. Here we are, where we have again a young musician playing under a tree, a lute or a chitarra, and he's looking into a candlestick with here it's very difficult to see because I took this picture, maybe it's not a very good picture, but he's looking on a candle flickering. And this is the only other drawing I know of this absolutely. It must have been a subject he adored, because very much his liking, we know, his involvement with poetry, with theater, with music, and his very eccentric personality. And also, Karel tells us about the inventory post-mortem, which has been published by Caterina Volpi, of the house in Via Gregoriana, where, in fact, chitarra was part of the beni and also a spinet. So if we go to the next image, I just like here to think that this, which is still in the anonymous, could be a Salvator Rosa, and we have obviously an image of taken from life in this case, while the other two are not. So I think this could be him again. It's a very sketchy and broad drawing, but quite lively because it is from life. So in another drawing, I like just to tell you a few things, although is this one, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, and has been attributed to Guercino by Nicola Starna, which has compared the style of this drawing, if we go to image 6, with this other study, which on the verso has a connected study for the martyrdom of St. James and a companion, which is datable to 1627. While if we go back to the Harlem, to the Tyler's drawing, image 5, he dates this later on to 1630s, the early 1630s. But what mostly fascinated me here was that actually Karel tells us, reminding me something that I should have remember, is that the use of this, what we used to call oil charcoal, in fact, it's a different type of, he calls it modified chalk or charcoal, which meant that it didn't have an oil solution, because oil would have left some sort of staining when analyzed. And this is, you know, Marjorie Shelley, which analyzed their early drawing pre-Roman time, pre the Roman journey of Guercino, before 1621, where she says that definitely there was absolutely no oil solution, because you would see that. So for a long time, we have described this drawing wrongly, at least I did. So this was very, very helpful to be reminded of this technical point. So I just want to say with this that nothing is left out in this catalog. You know, you start with the old history of the drawing, the attribution of the drawing, Karel also intuition, which are always, I have to say, very helpful, to also all technical points. And I think that's extremely, it will be, these two catalogs will stay as reference for generations to come, like some of the catalog we most love. And the next image, yes, this I just put down this drawing just because in looking at it, I had the same process, mental process, when looking recently at the painting, that if we see image 7, this painting by Borgianni of 1608. And when I saw it in the exhibition in Rome in Palazzo Barberini, I first thought, oh, but this is Lanfranco, it cannot be anything else. And I have to say, I did suffer at the beginning trying to understand why this had to be by Borgianni. But anyway, it is a documented somehow work, which in this case now you see trimmed because it was stolen in the, in the 76. And it was a much bigger pala d'altare, most probably for San Francesco a Ripa. And you can see how influenced Borgianni is by Correggio, and that's obviously the link with Lanfranco. And if we go back to the drawing in the Tyler's Museum, I mean, she's got a very Lanfrankian face, and the light falls down exactly like Lanfranco would do. But obviously, when you look at the way he's drawn, you have to agree very much with Carol that this drawing, it's not by Lanfranco, because the graphic style is not his style. So I was wondering, although we have no drawing at all by Borgianni, we have 5, 6 drawings which have all the attribution to Borgianni, but nothing consistent. And we know that also in the monograph done by Papi, I think in the 90s, 1990s, he explains what is still there valid, that unfortunately when you have no connection with any painting, and also you don't have a corpus of drawing where you can fit in together other information, it's very difficult to propose anything. But just because I had the same train of thought, I thought maybe this is something worth mentioning. And also I was very attracted by the drawing. It is a very handsome drawing. I like the quality. Now I'm not so, I don't know Cortese drawing well, but at all. Also because you don't see them often. And obviously if I would see one, maybe I miss it. But anyway, this was, I mean, going through this catalog has been wonderful company. And the fact that we have real catalog, I have to repeat, this is the third time, how wonderful it is to have printed catalog, but also this is a very generous size, but you can handle it. It's no problem. You can keep it in your hand quite easily, which doesn't happen sometimes anymore when books are so illustrious that become really overwhelming physically. So I think it couldn't be more exciting to have them. And I think even, Karel, if it took 20 years of time, these are very well spent, particularly for our benefit and also benefit of many future lovers of our master drawing. So now I have to say, I've never seen any of this drawing original, so I will need to come to the Tyler's Museum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christiana. I will stop sharing the screen. Thank you very much. That was also, I think, an interesting remark that we do not only have now the catalog of the collection of the Tyler's Museum, but we have an insight in the taste of the collector in me. And I think that's very important as well. I would like to thank the 3 speakers, but I think Tao is eager to respond to some of the comments. And
absolutely. First off, by saying I'm very glad that we're all in agreement that the printed catalogue is absolutely the thing to do and to have. I said it, and every speaker has repeated it, and it's so clear that if you have a book in your hands, you can get to know a group of works in a completely different way than when you're scrolling through a dossier and looking at an image on a screen. I'm very grateful for the kind words that were said about the work in the book. I'm thrilled with the possibilities that we might have another Rosa and Van Wittel. That would be fabulous. I have to admit, Simonetta, that I never considered that drawing could be Van Wittel. He was, of course, an artist who was patronized by Livio, who had lots of paintings by Van Wittel. But the inventory doesn't mention any drawings by him, so he didn't buy them, acquire them. But this would be wonderful. We're going to get into that very soon. And if possible, the Academy studies that, I shouldn't be getting into attribution things, but I do want to say the Academy studies that Sebastian mentioned is absolutely right. Some of them are so close to Bernini. And yet there's also Sacchi-esque traits. It remains a very difficult field. It's perhaps even worse than landscapes. if one were to assemble all the Roman Academy drawings of the mid-17th century, perhaps one would be able to get somewhere, but that hasn't been attempted yet. The introduction was very difficult, as I'm sure anyone who struggled through it, and I'm very grateful to the three speakers for having done so, quite obviously, but it's the history of that collection is very complex, very contradictory, and I hope and believe that if once one can get back into the Archivio di Stato in Rome and do a thorough search for the missing volumes of Don Livio's account books, we have the first 10 years or so of his Roman period, which I was able to use and which show a pattern of buying rather indiscriminately very interesting things and completely second, if not third-rate paintings just to decorate the house, perhaps. If one could find the rest of that, those accounts, much might be clarified. But Corona is not something we could either foresee. Had I done so, I would have gone to the Archivio years earlier to do that. But and the allure and the fascination exerted by Queen Christina of Sweden will always be associated with this collection, even if perhaps not many of the drawings that I discuss in these books actually passed through her hands. It's still, for Haarlem and for Taylor, Queen Christina remains a great figure, and rightly so, because she was an amazing, as Christiana reminded us, the position of this woman in Rome in the second half of the 17th century cannot be compared to anything else. There is no other instance that I can think of where a woman who has abdicated the throne, but still considers herself, of course, by right, a royal person, and therefore needs all the deference that demands, cohabitating within the city with the Pope, with the secular and the sacred powers. It must have been an incredible spectacle for contemporaries to watch and follow, and reading her biography and the correspondence of the various envoys to their respective courts in France and in Sweden, and makes you aware of that. I wish we could say that she was a prominent collector. I fear we cannot yet, and I'm not sure we ever will, of contemporary works. What else did I know? There's so many things that you raised, all of you. The point, the main point, and I think we all agree on that, is what I tried to say at the end of my talk, that these catalogs are wonderful to have and to look at, and you can find beautiful things, but they will help for other people to get ideas and to raise questions and maybe change everything, because no attribution is sacred, and they can all, we've seen how things arrived here in 1790 with name X, and then they changed 5 times, and now I call them Z, but there's no reason why the next generation will not return to a previous attribution or find a different name. That is the joy of art history. That's also the joy of working with old master drawings. And I look forward to seeing how that develops. Are there questions from the audience that we should be looking at?
Or does anyone of the speakers want to respond or add anything? Otherwise, I have a question.
Good.
Because I think one of the interesting things, and I think you told me that, so that I kept that in my mind all the time, that a printed catalog is in a certain order, because you give order to the drawings. And if you have a catalog online, which is wonderful as well, we have to say we're now saying that the printed catalog is there, but we need catalogs online as well. But you give order to things, so you make decisions. So these are the Italian drawings of the Titus Museum from the 16th and 17th century. And that means that, for example, Claude Lorrain is not in there, but was a very important part of the collection, as I understand, especially because what was interesting about this collection are all these landscape drawings. So in a way, maybe you could think about that a little bit more. Than if we want to talk about the taste of the collector, then maybe he should have been in there because he worked in Rome, and he is kind of, of course he's French, but he became a little bit Roman. So can you explain the decision you made?
One little detail: he wasn't French; he was Lorrainese. He was very proud of being Lorrain. There's almost 100 drawings by Claude, and the issues they raise, historically, I absolutely agree, they came from the same collection, and they need to be considered in tandem with these catalogs. But their status and as I said, the questions they raise are so different from what happens with these. Claude has such an oeuvre and is so well researched, that it would introduce an imbalance in these volumes that we felt would not do credit either to him or to the other artists. And it's a monographic study that you need to do with Claude. Having them next to Grimaldi is not that illuminating for his work. It's okay. Grimaldi is interesting to see in the light of Claude, but otherwise not so much. I think that'll be in perhaps the next volume, but for someone to write, I don't know.
Let's hope.
Well, if they have been treated really well. So,
Well, thank you. Are there any questions from the public? You can use the chat or the Q&A function if you have any questions or comments, or anyone who'd like to say something.
Otherwise, I don't know if the audience can hear me at home, but I was wondering, Karel, since you have this long experience in writing collection catalogs, maybe it would be interesting to, or I would think it's interesting to hear what your what the difference is between the first catalog from 2000 and researching and writing in those days and these two volumes right now.
That's a good question, because in fact, then you start thinking, online. Oh, right. Now, what Terry raises the question of how, in what way research done for the catalogue that was published in 2000 was different from that done for the catalogue that we present today. And for all the things one can say about online publications, the fact that there is so much material available, so many images, so much information online has made a huge difference. There's all kinds of information in these two volumes that I only know because you Google a name and something comes up, and very often not what you were looking for, but hey, exactly. And things like JSTOR and allow you to find articles, publications that one had no idea existed. No, it's much changed. Going to the Fototeca in the Kunsthistorisches or the Hertziana or the Getty is still very important and wonderful, but the addition of Wikipedia, I'm afraid to say, and all of these has made it's a completely different world. Yeah. Otherwise, you still, for archives, it's you have to. Now there's a suggestion.
that also tells you that the work is never done. So we can also, after so many years, you can revisit the material and look at it again. And I think that is what,
Auction catalogs also, you know, the fact some of the old ones are not yet online. So you have to go to the WIT library. But for now, I have found things that were auctioned in Edinburgh or in Toronto or in Wiesbaden. I had no idea. I've never seen the catalog, but online you can find them.
Yeah,
it's great.
So printed and online.
Absolutely.
It's like the combination.
But it's a different thing.
Perfect.
It's an inventory if it's online, and these are catalogs.
Exactly. Yeah. Are there any more questions? I don't see any more questions. Everybody's very happy. Presentation. Oh, one more question. Yes. Advice for people wanting to write a catalog in the classic way that
Yes. Marianne asked, can I give any wise words of advice to people who would like to contemplate writing a catalog or compiling a catalog? It starts with lots of looking and long looking before you put any pen to paper, and comparing and just, keeping track of things you've seen. In Christiana's presentation just now, she showed the verso of that, under the director of that Lanfranco drawing with the crossed circle. I have seen that drawing many years ago, and it's completely escaped it. I don't think it's in my list of the drawings with that mark on it. You need to keep track and make sure and get all your information in such a way, together in such a way that it allows you to follow all what you've seen, what you've read, what you've heard over a long period. It's not lightly undertaken, but it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to do, as you well know.
Yes, and also I think sharing your initial ideas and with other people, that really helps, because sometimes you're stuck in one track and then somebody else helps you out of the track and leads you somewhere else, and maybe that's the clue to go further. So I think it's very important also to share.
It's a mistake to think that all the scholarship comes from me. I mean, so many, as someone mentioned just now, so many colleagues and friends have helped by giving suggestions and saying, have you looked at that? Or I don't think it's by accident. Why not by why? It's a collaborative effort.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing, I think, with all these minds that have looked at so many drawings individually that come together and then can help.
But at the end, it's one person that decides, and who's often wrong, and who may,
or not.
The Cortese may not be by Cortese, or not, we know. We'll see. Yeah.
Maybe you can show the books once more.
There's one.
Yeah. So these are the catalogs. So this in two parts.
No, volume 2.
As Christiana said, they're very
nice to hold. And they open it beautifully done.
Yeah. Well, if there are not any other questions in the chat or Q&A, I would like to thank, first, I'd like to thank Karel for this wonderful publication and the wonderful talk, and our 3 speakers from Rome, Vienna, and London all the way, and that they were able to respond.
Absolutely.
And we would like to thank you very much for doing that and giving us your beautiful insights in the catalog. And then I would like to give the word to Marianne Scharlo, director of the Titus Museum, to say the last few words.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad that we can launch this online meeting. And I think that we all can agree that this exchange of ideas and views and inspiration was very enjoyable indeed. To share the joy of looking at good drawings is just very nice. And above all, it was a very fitting occasion to highlight Karel's magnificent catalogue, which is heavy in every sense of the word. It's a strange idea that thanks to COVID-19, we are able to come together digitally with more than 160 people from all over the world. It would have never, not even have fitted in this lecture hall. But this is one of the few things which are really nice that we have them nowadays. And we could not dream of this before we had this pandemic in the world. And I also should like to take this opportunity to thank Karel most warmly again for finishing his magnum opus after so many years. And the Tyler Museum is deeply grateful to you, Karel, for all your hard work. And thanks to you, we can share exciting new information with the public anywhere in the world, with scholars, with collectors, with anyone, which has been made accessible thanks to these magnificent volumes. And now we can also publish the new information on our website, and I'm sure that that will be very enjoyable for the public. I also should like very much to thank Simonetta Prosperi Valenti, Sebastian Schütze, and Cristiana Romalli for their insightful remarks and their willingness to share their joy in the coming out of this publication. And also, of course, Klazina Botke for moderating the discussion and keeping everybody on track. And last, but certainly not least, my colleagues Petra and Sarah for their technical assistance, and Terry van Druten for the general coordination of this digital conference. If you are at all in the neighborhood, please come to visit our exquisite exhibition of 17th century Italian drawings in the print room. You have exactly 1 week to do it. So come and run and see it and enjoy the fantastic drawings we have selected for you. Dear audience, thank you so much for participating in this event, and I do hope that it will be possible in the near future to see each other live again. And until then, I wish you and your dear ones a safe and healthy winter. Thank you very much.